afternoon. I am Pravin Bikram Rana, Deputy Director of Alliance Francaise of Kathmandu. This is my pleasure to welcome you all in this edition of LINKFEST, Facing Our Time. This event is presented by French Embassy, Alliance Francaise of Kathmandu, and Nepal Economic Forum. Without further delaying, now in order to start formally our program, I would like to kindly request His Excellency François-Xavier Léger come on stage to say his opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Bonjour and namaskar. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you for today's debate, jointly organized by the French Embassy in Kathmandu, the Alliance Francaise, and the Nepal Economic Forum. Each year, we propose such a debate on big issues at the end of January, and it has become an important event for us. This year, 2019, is a very special year because we are celebrating 70 years of diplomatic relation between France and Nepal. In order to commemorate, we will be organizing a series of events all along the year, and today's debate is the second one. The first one was 9th of January, when the French Vice Minister came to Nepal, and we formally launched this commemoration year. Today's topic, Facing Our Time, will be extensively discussed by our panel. Time can have a multidimensional perspective. In Nepal, religious and cultural dimensions make it even more complicated. While time is something one cannot control, the meaning of time can be interpreted in different ways. From the culture around time to the discourse around time, from comparative perspective to deep spirituality, from reference to the future and the past, from keeping time constant through conservation. There is really an ocean of perspectives to explore. When we are looking at the future, there are many dimensions to ponder upon. By 2030, Nepal aims to be a $100 billion economy. At the same time, there are many, many global deadlines to meet by 2030. The Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, IPCC, aim at keeping the global warming within 1.5 degrees, which will require a transformational shift in how production and consumption are undertaken. There are societal shifts that are taking place, which are changing the way people consume and produce media. It is transforming at a rapid pace. There are also new trends emerging where there is more interest in the world of history, nature and culture, bringing back people to explore cities and civilization through different lenses. To address these changing dimensions, diverse personalities such as business leader, climate scientist, tourism entrepreneur, and our goodwill ambassador for the 70th anniversary will interact during this session. I am convinced that each of them will bring their own perspective to our discussion. The panel will be moderated by Sujeev Shakya, Chairperson of Nepal Economic Forum, with whom we have been collaborating for the past few years. There will be a Q&A, obviously, at the end, and I kindly request all of you to actively participate. I wish to thank the panelists for participating, Sujeev Shakya for moderating and being the master of our time today, and of course, you all for being here this afternoon. Well, as my own time is limited, I let Sujeev and the panelists face their time. Thank you very much. I give the mic, the floor to Sujeev. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I think for Nepal Economic Forum, it has been a great pleasure to collaborate. This is our 5th edition of LINKFEST we have been doing for the past 2.5 years. I'm just today a glorified timekeeper, and I'll ensure that I'll keep nudging the panelists. We would have, in terms of the format, an introductory round where people are going to, the panelists will talk about how do they relate to this issue of facing our time. And then we will have some more conversations and some interventions from the floor. So overall, this should be fun. I remember, when Anil was coming in, Anil Shah was coming in, he was saying that, looking at the panelists and looking at the topic, I could not stop coming here, and I think, we should make it fun rather than a serious discussion. We have a wonderful panel. Arnico Panday is the Regional Program Manager of ICIMOD. Camille, Hanesse, next to me, is the founder of Cosy, Nepal. Shiwani Neupane, on the extreme right, she is the director of Panday Group and also a writer. And then we have Shrinkhala Khatiwada, Miss Nepal World 2018, and also the Goodwill Ambassador of 70th anniversary of France and Nepal bilateral relations. So I think when we are talking about the broad strokes and we talk about facing our time, I thought that let's deconstruct this phrase, facing our time. So when we are talking about facing our time, so the first word, facing, so we are talking about what is our present made of, how to face what our present demands, and what memories we want to carry of the present. So the panelists are going to mostly talk about their own personal narratives, and we want to make it more of a conversation. So that is where the R comes in, as to who are we, what are the generational issues around us. And so if you look at in Nepal, 50% are youth and 50% women, but few people do not want to give away to young people across politics, organizations, and society. Why? So that's the question we want to ask. We also want to talk about time. When we are talking about facing our time, what is the time we are talking about? What is the present or time we are talking about? Or is it the future we are talking about? So there's a lot of deconstruction that the panelists will make and a lot of issues to talk about. I think that when you're talking about the why to this discussion is that when we look at the future, as Ambassador just mentioned, Nepal is looking at becoming a $100 billion economy. As we look at Nepal, the past 12 years have just gone by, and we think nothing has happened. But if you look at the economy from just being a $12, $13 billion economy, today we are a $30 billion economy, and it's a sizable economy. We also have challenges. I think just to repeat some of the words that's coming out of Ambassador's opening remarks, a meeting of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030. We have the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that requires global warming to be the 1.5 degree to maintain it. And we have just 12 years to do most of those things, and that's what Arnico is going to talk about. And that would require a big change in our thinking. So there are lots of trends to talk about, and in this panel, so if we move on to the how, we have a scientist, we have a heritage conservation person who's also converted that into business, we have an author and a businesswoman, and we have a youth icon. And so we begin the first round, and maybe Arnico, the first round will be as to talking about how do the panelists connect with this topic of facing our time. So Arnico, the icebreaker.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here. I guess to give a brief introduction, I'm an atmospheric scientist by training. I've been spending the last 7 years working at ICIMOD on regional atmospheric issues of both air pollution and climate change in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, but also interfacing a lot on the global level on climate change policies. And if I look at facing our time, it's facing what are the challenges for us that we're facing looking into the future, and what do we need to address? And to me, climate change is a very big one, and recent assessment reports that have come out really have highlighted the narrative on climate change and made it much crisper, much clearer. We know that climate change affects a lot of things. Yes, there's a global average temperature increase, but that actually has a lot of implications with it. It's not just that there might be warmer winter nights or more heat waves in the summer, but also it affects the the weather system, it affects the monsoon, it affects where and how much rainfall you get. In the Himalaya region as well as in the Arctic and Antarctic, it melts this frozen water that's in glaciers and in snowfields, contributing to sea level rise. But also a lot more erratic weather patterns, a lot more extreme rainfall events, a lot more droughts. So climate change is not just an increase in temperature, it's a messed up climate system that's happening as a result of an increase in average temperatures. The big driver for climate change obviously is carbon dioxide, which is a which gets released to the atmosphere when you burn fossil fuels. There's also other drivers of climate change, black carbon particles, like the black soot particles and some other gases that are in the air for much shorter periods of time. The Paris Agreement from 2015 talked about maintaining climate change, the average temperature increase to within 1.5 to 2 degrees and not letting it go beyond that. And just about 2.5 months ago, this IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report in 1.5 degree came out, and it took a very close look at what it means for the climate to increase to 1.5 or to 2 degrees and what the difference between the two is, and the difference is drastic. If you go to a 2 degree increase world versus a 1.5, you see major changes in climate and major impact on the economies. And basically the message is you need to maintain the climate within 1.5 degrees. The other key message from that report is that the time left to do that is very little. The temperature's already increased to a degree or more, and people's activities are accelerating. The economies are going in the wrong direction. There's more fossil fuels being burned. We have until about 2030 to slow down the climate change and to stabilize it at 1.5 degrees, or it's too late. So the time we're facing is really narrow, really short to have to bring about major improvements. At the same time, it cannot only address CO2, also need to address some of the air pollutants that affect climate, and that's actually partly where the hope is, because there's no debate, no discussion on the economic and health benefits of cleaning up air pollution, which already kills 7 million people a year worldwide. But the switch required is, it's a major switch in energy production, it's a major switch in products, in building materials, in what we consume, in behavior, in our preferences. It's also a major business opportunity. And if we look at how quickly over the last 1 year the world switched away from plastic straws when there was an awareness that plastic straws were really bad for the environment, I think there is hope that we can achieve something in the next 12 years, but it really needs a commitment from everyone in this room and beyond. Thank you.
Thanks, Arnico. I think the big word I'm just taking away is switch. So be ready to switch to that mode in the next round as we talk about switch. So our next speaker, your opening remarks, Camille.
All right. Hello, everyone. So I'm Camille. I'm one of the co-founders of Cosy Nepal. Cosy Nepal is a small company that tackle the renovation of old private building. So not public building, but private building, in a way that we want to, give them a new purpose, avoid them decaying, avoid them being destroyed, in order for the owners themselves to regain pride in their patrimony, or to cater the need of guests if it has to be. So the subject interests me in 3 sides. So the first thing is how we look at the future of the past, right? Like we look at how to adapt, how to reuse old building to cater the need of today. We also look at the future itself by trying to give opportunity to local owners, because like I mostly work in the old pattern, and I see big exode. I see people moving out. I see people leaving their old communities, and I find it very sad, right? So like we try to find solution for local owners to stay in their historical neighborhood and to revive their ancestor houses and revive the pride of their patrimony. And we look at the present as well when we think of tourism, to find a way that is non-disruptive, that a tourism that would be, let's call it immersed tourism, or tourism that tourism of experience rather than a tourism that just grab things and do not, bring contribution. So we hope to find solutions so like local people can interact with tourists in a positive way. So, yeah.
Thanks, Camille. I think some of the keywords, again, I'm taking away is non-destructive, and we'll talk about experience that we will discuss. So, Shiwani, your opening remarks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shiwani Neupane, and I'm a director at Ambe Group. We are involved in a lot of manufacturing industries, but I look after the instant noodle division of the business right now. I'm also a published writer. I've written 2 books. Both are fiction. I was a past life journalist. I don't do reporting anymore, but I am still a political opinion maker, a political analyst. That's another word I use. In terms of the topic today of facing our time, I think a lot of problems we face, especially the ones Arnico and Camille mentioned, they're quite global in nature, so global warming. And as Camille just mentioned, sustainability and preservation. And in terms of what I want to talk about today, about the issues I face, I want to talk about how we as young people consume media, how we as a nation that's growing want to use technology as our economy grows, and what else? Let's see. Yeah, so those are the issues I want to talk about today. And I also want to talk about how, for example, I have multiple careers and multiple professions, and facing our time for me also means dealing with issues of, having multiple jobs, multiple careers, multiple professions, and what does that mean as a generation? Because I find that it's not just me, but many people in my generation who are dealing with the similar issues of identity. So.
Thanks, Shiwani. I think I do also relate to this multiple, sort of career stuff. One of my friends actually said that I maintain a portfolio career, and I think if you talk to a lot of millennials, they want to do a lot of things, and I think that will come back to you on that. So, Shrinkhala, your opening remarks.
Hello everyone, I'm Shrinkhala Khatiwada. I am Miss Nepal World 2018, and I'm also very privileged to be the Goodwill Ambassador of the Nepal France friendship relationship of 70 years. So sitting here, as Sujeev mentioned, as a youth icon, I would love to talk about how the youth of today, the Nepali youth of today, view the ongoing scenario of our country, how optimistic they are about the ongoing political and economic changes, how they are viewing social media, like Shiwani said, and how social media has been shaping our lives. I would also like to talk about equality, education, and how the youth of today are slowly growing into becoming more socially active, and how they really want to give back to the community. Being someone who has represented Nepal at an international forum, at an international platform, I would also like to talk about how the world sees the Nepali youth and how we are being perceived all around the world. And I do believe that we have the potential to really represent ourselves globally, and that's what I'd love to talk about today, Sujeev.
Okay, I think since you're having the mic, Shrinkhala, maybe we'll start with you the second round. In terms of, sort of you've represented Nepal, you've taken with, Nepal, so you've been on the global stage. So what does it mean? And as a youth icon, what do people look up to you for? What are some of the interactions you're having? What is the world you're getting into? And just to relate to some of your opening remarks, maybe we can start that thread and then take the conversation ahead.
What I've realized is that once you are at a public platform, whatever you do or say has this tremendous scope of reaching out to thousands and even millions of people. And smaller things that I do can actually make an impact and change people's lives. Like if I'm posting about body positivity, I get thousands of messages from young generation saying that just that small post has helped them embrace themselves. So for me, to represent Nepal and then to be sitting here as someone who is a public figure, I believe that whatever I say or do can make tremendous impact, and that's what I've been trying to do.
Thank you. I think, so if I would just go back then to Arnico in terms of, we are talking about, sort of what Shrinkhala brought about is that as a public figure, she's being able to influence the switch. So what could be some of the switches she can influence, or what are some of the switches you are thinking of in terms of what we want to change, or what can change as we stare at 2030 and we stare at the impact of climate change?
Well, I think if we stick to Nepal perspective and look at what are the challenges facing us towards 2030, climate change is one of them, and it's interrelated to other things. There's also issues of energy security, trade balance, etc. I think one of the big switches I'd like to see in Nepal, and it's realistic and starting to happen, is a switch away from fossil fuel energy. We are moving more towards having self-sufficiency with hydropower, but hydropower is not the only way to generate electricity. In fact, we're reaching a point now where the whole question of having a very large storage dam for Buri Gandaki River can be questioned. Because that's a very 20th century technology, to build a battery for peak power by damming up a river, when there's much cheaper battery technologies available now and coming online. We can have much more flexible solar, wind power based, smaller battery storage systems. But switching to cleaner energy, it's a switch away, switching our transport fleet away from fossil fuel, switching our electricity production away from fossil fuel towards clean energy, but also switching to clean cooking. Indoor air pollution is a major health issue, a major killer worldwide as well as in Nepal. The WHO figures for Nepal are that outdoor air pollution kills 9,000 people a year. That's one 2015 earthquake per year. Indoor air pollution kills 22,000 people per year. And it's not just through lung cancer, it's also affecting strokes and heart attacks and blood pressure, etc. So switching away from cooking with firewood, I think, is a big switch I'd like to see for people's health. It also has an impact on the environment and on the climate. When you burn firewood, you release to the atmosphere black particles that go all the way to the high mountains and deposit in snow and ice and help melt them. I would also like to see a switch of Nepal being an exporter of labor. Our young generation, far too many people are going and doing manual labor, building other countries' airports, other countries' stadiums, other countries' roads, when we really have a need to build our own infrastructure at home. When, in fact, we have such a labor shortage now in construction in Nepal that what people are able to earn here is not much less anymore than what they would be able to earn in Doha or Dubai or somewhere. I'd like the young generation to have opportunities to travel abroad, to see the world, but not to be compelled to go abroad to work. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Arnico. That's. I think I'll keep that sort of the migration and labor in my back of the mind. But I think since I want to use the word switch as a thread and come to Camille in terms of talking about when we are talking about the change that is required in terms of how we live, how we sort of look at pollution, issues around pollution, look at issues around heritage. That's an area you're looking at. So what have you been observing, and how do you see this panning out over a period of time, and what has been some of your experience or stories you would like to share?
The thing with heritage, at least, it's a very new trend, right? It's something that has popped out quite suddenly, people realizing, oh, actually our homes are something that we could get benefit out, but also are some things that could become comfortable, are some places that could become desirable. And so we came, at least in the old patterns, the areas that I've studied, we came from, people mass destroying their places to an extent where they get interest in it again. But my concern is that it should come from a core perspective, like it should come from, I'm very much worried that we take tourism as a money machine thing, and we just renovate for the sake of renovating, but letting the local people getting away from their own area, because you don't. I mean, if a local area is deserted by its inhabitants, then the point is totally lost. So
do you think that is also the way we are looking at tourism? I mean, we see a lot of heritage, rooms coming up. Like in Patan, it's about 1,000 rooms that have come up, and we've been looking around. So do you see this, sort of the going back to how you are building your houses to, olden style, and is that going to contribute to, conservation, or is it basically creating a heritage Disneyland? Do you see that? Which again,
I'm afraid of that.
What Arnico was bringing about is that, the sort of what the challenges we are facing. Do you think that's sort of, will we be creating heritage Disneylands?
We should not be creating a heritage Disneyland, but of course we go through conservating, so we have to conservate, but we should not conservate just for the sake of creating a money machine. Like, we have to conserve it, we have to preserve it with the local people inside, and for that we have to find way to retain them in. So we have to have opportunities for the youth to stay in. I'm so sad to see all this exode, all these people moving away, whereas actually there is so many things to do, sharing culture, sharing, patrimony, sharing heritage, sharing resources. There is so many things to do, and still we see youth living away. So whereas, I'm here, I'm French, somehow that is not my, I leave my seat to someone else if needed, but I would like to see, more people facing their time here in Nepal.
No, I think I'm so tempted to bring this up. I mean, while I would love to, we go to Shiwani on this issue around people and how people view, work or view jobs, and that's, the issue around your career also. But I think this issue, what Arnico also raised about people going out, and it's very interesting that the last World Bank statistics, if you look at it, while we keep talking about $8-9 billion coming from outside as remittances, the remittances from Nepal to India is now crossed $3 billion. It's, Nepal is now number 8 in terms of sending remittances to India, and in terms of the value, it is number 2 after Qatar. So, people earning multiple, it's about $6,000 a year is what they're sending out, compared to, what $3,000 is what average Nepalis are earning. So there must be a lot of cultural dimensions to it, and how youth look at jobs, work, and maybe, related to that and the larger issue of the portfolio career. Shiwani, your remarks.
I have so many things to say.
Please go ahead.
Okay.
And other panelists can please, sort of plug in.
Yeah, please jump in, because there were several times I think I wanted to kind of say something, and I lost my train of thought. So I hope you'll jump in when I speak. In terms of the labor shortage issue, it is a major issue in industries as well, and it's not just in industries. I think we see it every day. If you need a plumber or a carpenter or any skilled labor in Kathmandu, it's becoming quite a issue to find people who want to stay, even including people who work for me. I think one foot is always out of the door. There's someone who's applying for a visa, or has their passport stamped, or it comes to me and says, Didi, I'm just going to stay for another 6 months, and I'm going to then go to Qatar. So this is, I feel like this is a problem that every household in Kathmandu that is hiring people is facing. And I think the reason for this is also our culture of hopelessness, the politics of hopelessness. We are often taught that, that we are a poor developing country where not much can happen. Our papers are filled with, really sad, depressing news articles, and such issues. The statistic you just mentioned, I wonder how many people know about it. I bet very, very few people, and we don't sit there and we don't think, okay, Nepal can also be created by many young people, and Tutul has been an example of, they had other issues later, but a lot of young people have looked at Tutul's success story and said, oh wow, if that's possible, I guess my startup is possible too. And I've traveled to a lot of countries. I've lived in New York and Singapore. I was in Korea last year, and in almost every major city, there is so much space for innovation and startup culture. The government is actually putting money into innovation centers. They are built in Sri Lanka, in Colombo. This was a fantastic example. This old industrial area was converted to this beautiful startup hub. And Colombo, we're not very far. We're both South Asian countries, and I think Colombo is a really great example of what Nepal can follow. But instead of seeing this, talking about innovation and incubation and ideas and how to encourage young people, the politics is very, very far. The conversations we're having in the media are very, very far from this. And I think this is one of the major reasons people always have one foot out of the door in Nepal.
Yeah, I think, Arnico, you wanted to jump in on something? Yeah.
If I could jump in briefly, and that's about people having a foot out the door. It's people going for labor, for jobs, but it's also for studies. And in 1992, when I went to college in the US, I didn't have much choice of a high-quality college education here in Nepal. And unfortunately, the situation is still that way, with a few small exceptions, but there's a very large number of Nepali students who go study abroad. I think in the US, it's among the top 10 international student populations. In Australia, the Nepali student population is number 3 after the Chinese and Indian students, and it's family separations. It's spending a lot of money abroad that could be spent here. And yes, there is a huge value in studying abroad, but not for everyone, and not to have to be compelled to it. And so I just want to mention briefly, apart from my day job at ICIMOD, I'm also on the board of trustees at Yulin's Education Foundation. And you probably are aware of Yulin School, but Yulin's Foundation, the nonprofit owners of the school, also owns a large piece of land in Kaphle district with a plan to set up a liberal arts college in the coming years. And hopefully, even if we can just keep back 500 students from going abroad, as well as start turning and actually create a reverse migration to turn Nepal into a center for international education for people to come back to Nepal to study and for people from elsewhere to come here. I think we have a landscape that we're selling to tourists who come here for 5 or 10 days. We should be able to sell our beautiful landscape to people who come here for 4 years to study.
No, that's a great point. I think that's a great point, and I think what also for all of us who studied outside, because there were not much of opportunities at that point of time in Nepal, I think there are opportunities we need to create. Also, I think just want to touch upon what Shiwani is talking about, this hopelessness. I think there's another interesting statistics that when the diversity visa comes up, about 1 million people apply. And which means that out of, 1 out of every 12 Nepalis who are eligible to apply for a visa, they apply for a diversity visa, which means 1 million people are ready to jump out of Nepal. And I think it's about hopelessness. And I would just like to, sort of move that discussion a bit into, a lot of this is also being shaped by the new media. And so I think, as the ambassador was talking about, and from the transformation part of it, the new media is there. And I think I would go back to Shrinkhala in terms of, as someone who has benefited from the advent of social media, to someone who's also facing challenges because of social media. How do you see this? And as we were discussing yesterday, this whole world of fake news, and because that is also responsible for this hopelessness and responsible for not being able to make some of the switches we need to make. Yeah.
Just one small thought. I think the way that we need to view it is nothing has been done in Nepal so far. So anything that we do is new. Anything that you do with proper research and mindset and proper training, it's going to be successful, and that's what's missing here, because we are all trying to look for quick fixes. Like if you go to Australia, you are guaranteed that if you work for certain hours, you will get paid certain dollars. So a lot of brains is being lost in terms of that, because a lot of young, bright minds are going abroad and they are not doing something where they are using their creativity, they are just using their labor. And about social media and fake news, this has been something that's been bothering me for quite some time now. Yeah, just this other day I woke up and I got a call from one of the reputed online news sources, and they said, so Shrinkhala ji, what do you have to say about the recent controversy that's been going on about you? And I said, sorry, I'm unaware about the controversy. I've not caught up to it yet. And the reporter said that there's this news that's been going around which says, Shrinkhalaले 12 वर्षको उमेरमा रातो गुलाबको लागि चुम्बन बेचिन्, which means I sold my kiss when I was 12 years old for a red rose. So that was a poem that I wrote for social media awareness about sexual violence and how young girls or young guys view sexual violence and abuse. And they just translated it to be my own personal experience and made a news out of it, which got thousands and thousands of clicks and shares and views. And then I went on, and the end of the article wrote, P.S. We tried to connect to Shrinkhala about it, about really knowing for sure if it's her own news, but then her phone was switched off, so we don't really know if it's true. So I don't know how many people went on to read to the end of the article, but I knew that the comment section was filled with hate comments like, what more can we expect for someone from beauty pageant industry? So this is how social media has been portraying news in a sense that they are not feeding the public what the reality is. They are giving something that people would love to click. So the headlines are not created to summarize the entire event, but right now if I have said something controversial in the sense that one sentence, just that one sentence, if you catch that one sentence and make a headline out of it, if it gives you clicks, then that's what the news has been covering. And what bothers me is the fact, okay, I'd like to relate it to my Miss World journey. When I was there, there was this debate about my popularity and then the very sensitive issue of Nirmala Pant and why she had not been getting as much media space as I was. And I totally agree with whatever people were debating on, because I do agree that she needed much more media attention. She needed much more of shares and likes or comments than what I did. But the media portrayed things in a way that they know that glamour sells. They know that these kinds of stuff sell. So they were just feeding social media with news of Shrinkhala, Shrinkhala's this, Shrinkhala's that, because that would get them views, but Nirmala Pant would not. And that's how media has been shaping the way that the society is forming and looking at stuff. I look at the recent trending list of YouTube, and it makes me sad, because I do know that there's a lots and lots of issues that needs to be talked about. Government is bringing out new subsidies for agriculture. They are bringing in loans. They are bringing in health insurance, and I believe not more than 5% people would know about it, and media is not spreading these news, and all the budget is freezing because people don't even know about it. But the media is constantly feeding us news like, I don't know if you know this, but Kauli Budi, I don't know what that even means, but you know, funny news like that gets all the media space, and youth are being more hopeless. I mean, this adds on to that as well. That's what I feel like.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, with every tool, and it's very interesting to hear your perspective, because I think your rise as in Miss Nepal, it was all through social media voting. You know, I mean, you know, when you went to become the Miss World, you know, that was also a lot of voting that was involved. So there are, I mean, we can use media positively also, social media also positively. And I think one of the things we will, you know, I'll come back to the panelists and maybe maybe I'll start with Camille first, is that we also this whole world of tourism, the adventure tourism, about discovering the heritage has also begun because of of social media also, because I think that we see, because when we look at people going to a certain temple or going to a heritage site, they post on Facebook and their Instagram, and then there are people following it, and there's so many people go in, so how do you see that from a positive, or is that a challenge you see, Camille?
Of course it's a challenge here, because it's killing the chicken in the egg, no? Like you actually want to create something authentic, and you want to create something that is genuine, but then if the entire India decide to visit that same temple, or then like the authenticity is lost. So of course for us it's a challenge in terms of, but to come back to what Shrinkhala and everyone has said, I think we could resume or talk about qualityness, no? So me, as far as I'm concerned, I look at quality accommodation, fewer but better. And I would say, like, we need quality journalism. So like, it's all resumed to that. Let's stop, this mass production of everything. So not only mass production of goods, but mass production of thoughts, and reduce to the essence of things, the best of the.
Yeah, I think looking at quality, and I'll come to Shiwani on this, because one of the work we've been doing around is about curating content, and now because there's so much of free content, and you really don't know what is correct and what is fake. Now there's a lot of content curating that's happening, where people subscribe to daily, sort of, it could be a podcast or a daily summary of, it could be news information and things that you're interested in. So I think when it comes to quality, because when we see, if you look at the history of any product or service, it becomes a mass product, and suddenly you have these, sort of quality takes in, and then again a new world of businesses and new world of services emerge. I don't know, that's just loud thinking I'm doing. Shiwani, you would want to intervene here?
About quality news?
The news, the quality issues around, what is this, how do you see, because you've been writing, doing journalism, where do you see all this coming in terms of fake news, as we were discussing, what Shrinkhala brought about fake news. So where do you see all this, doing business as well as writing?
So my master's is in journalism, for a lot of you who don't know that. And one of the things we talked about in journalism school, which was 3 years ago, was about how the media landscape is changing so rapidly that none of us have any clue about what the future of the media is going to look like. And I think that's why, media is extremely important. It's also media is also at a time where no one knows what the future of the media is going to look like. We all know the future is digital, but we don't know what are the paid versions that are going to, if paid versions are going to work. Actually, when I was in college, BuzzFeed was the #1 news portal, and now it's closing down. So the point of clickbait news is, I think, it has a cycle, but like an ice cream shop that sells really fancy ice cream, that it has a cycle. The same thing, like the quality at the end always wins, and I think we're seeing that in news today as well. New York Times is running perfectly well, and it has a paid subscriber model that's they've tested, and they had a really difficult time testing it in the beginning, but now they're making a lot of money. And BuzzFeed, which seemed like the new next startup and the new news media that everybody was following, clickbait news, headline news, listicles, that's what we call it in journalism, listicles. And now all of that is going out of shape again, and it's not as relevant, or the public has a short attention span for these things, I think. But I also want to talk about how I myself have been not a victim, but I've perpetuated fake news. Because, for example, if something, I think it was mostly during the time of the earthquake. I remember this one time when I was reporting during the earthquake, and this child was brought into Norvik, and I was around the area. There was a massive aftershock, and somebody said, this child's parents are missing. And I'd already been very, very successful in linking many families to their children, to their mothers, to their wives, using social media. So when that happened, obviously, as I had been doing it, I just quickly took a photo of the child and I posted it online, and I said, this child is missing his parents, everybody, let's help him find his parents. And in a matter of, I think, an hour, it turned out that was fake. That wasn't true. His parents were right there, and somebody had given me fake news, and now this child's photo was all over the internet, and I felt terrible because it went viral. And then I had a very hard time in a matter of an hour saying this is not true. I took it down, but then people had screenshotted it. It's very fast. It's very rapid, but sometimes we can also go very, very wrong.
Yeah. I think, thanks, Shiwani. I think I want to connect this back to Arnico when you're talking about the switch that's required, because I think if you read the 21 lessons for 21st century, Yuval Noah Harari, he talks about, how media does not want to talk about pollution, because pollution is killing more people than terrorism. But if you report about terrorism, it sells, and that's what you get more views. So how do you see, do you see that switch also taking place, Arnico, as you're working around in terms of, where social media and new media really takes over these issues that are required, where we need to look at a switch around how we consume things, how we produce things, or how we use things?
Well, I think for things that change relatively slowly, like the climate, it is difficult to capture momentary attention. But at the same time, climate change does involve lots of major events that happen that are linked to climate change, and those are the ones that catch attention. Related to pollution, of course, there's a need for more awareness, and it feels very long time ago, but it was only in 2015 that we set up the first air quality monitoring station in Nepal. Late 2015, so just over 3 years ago. And I feel that there's much more awareness now in the public, in the media, about air quality. And there are several parallel systems operating, which is good. Even if one goes down, the other ones operate. There's apps for getting air pollution data. People are talking about it. It's not just some random vague thing. There's now numbers attached to it. So I think there is a need for awareness to keep growing, and it's challenging. But I actually wanted to get back to another point also related to social media and to people's ability to create content, which, yes, there's an ability to create fake news, but there's also an ability to really create movements for change really rapidly. And your example, Shiwani, about that child, if it happened to have been a child really missing the parent, that would have been...
There were many
right.
who were missing.
Exactly. So
to their families. Yeah.
If you look at how quickly Carpool Kathmandu grew during the blockade and brought people together, or even with promoting domestic tourism, if I look at how many friends in the 20s I have now who go to Mardi Himal trekking or to Rara Lake or somewhere like that, who go explore places that their parents would never have dared to go to, who bring income to rural areas, who grow a sense of pride and a knowledge about the country and about the geography of the country. I've very recently realized that if I'm interested in the road condition of the Narangkap-Mugling Road, I just have to go into YouTube and see who posted a video most recently to see what the condition of the road is. It's not like the amount of content people create, and yes, there's a certain amount of it that's fake news and things like that, but and I think what is missing is for the public and for journalists to learn how to filter what is correct news and what is not. But I think that there's a certain power to being able to create content, put it out for the world to see. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Arnico. But Camille, do you want to add something, because one of the things we are talking about is also the social media, while Arnico is also saying that this is also creating the awareness. We are getting rural tourism is increasing, but you're also saying is that this is also bringing in too many people and the carrying capacity is becoming an issue. So what, one is the quality side of it. What are some of the things we can do around this? Any thoughts you have, or any thoughts, any of the stuff you're doing relate to this? Yeah.
I mean, I think, yeah, it's the word of mouth is wonderful. I mean, today's, you can really share the right message to people the way you want it as well. I mean, it does not need to be disrupted by others. You can really, for example, as far as Cosy Nepal is concerned, we never use those big booking platforms to book our place, because now the right message can be carried directly to the people. I don't need to, use others to, and then to, all this trend, for example, on TripAdvisor of reviewing and putting down people. I don't even need to be registered in that type of platform, because directly the message can be relayed to my audience. So that's one, yeah. Oh, you want to go first?
Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to add to Camille. Like she said, I was going through I wanted to book a good Airbnb around Patan, and I jumped into this link where it was a very good balcony house, and it was Cosy Nepal, by the way, and I just booked it based on the reviews that I saw, so it did not even need ads or anything. It's just social media playing its role where it's necessary, and I just wanted to add on, give credit to social media where it's due, because all the success that we got in Miss World, the project of building a health center for the Chepang community, and what kind of support they've been getting, it's all through social media, and I'm very thankful that we are getting this platform where we can just voice out, we can just spread across anything that we want to, and you don't even really have to be famous, you just need to catch on to the trend, or you just need to have that spark in your post, and then it goes on viral. So it's a big opportunity as well.
I agree, Shrinkhala.
Yeah. You wanted to add something?
Yeah, sure. So all of this discussion, it reminded me of something. Once again, about our country as a whole. So social media is a really powerful force for people to decide where they want to go to next. So there is something, I was reading this article about how this Lake Wanaka, I don't know how to say this, in New Zealand, their tourism, it doubled. It was about 8%, it was like 20% after they started using social influencers from Instagram to promote the place. Similarly, it was other places like Maldives and Greece. They've been using social media, especially Instagram, to promote their cities. And I think in terms of, that's something we could do as a country as well, make Nepal one of the most Instagrammable countries in the world, and Kathmandu maybe one of the most Instagrammable cities in the world. This is where I feel really sad, because our government is not as forward thinking. We only come up with these ideas once somebody else has done them. I was speaking to a judge from Singapore at dinner like a couple of months ago, and I'd asked him, what is the reason Singapore is so successful? And he's still a judge in Singapore. It's like a very high-ranking man. And he looked at me and he said, Singapore thinks 50 years down the line. They don't think today. When they're making policies, they're addressing it for 50 years later. So what they are addressing right now is global warming, and they're building pretty much like a floodgate. They're thinking about building a floodgate around Singapore, so that when the icebergs start melting, and Singapore is an island, it's going to affect Singapore. They're prepared, they're ready, and we could do so much with such a beautiful country like ours using social media if only we were forward thinking, and that's what I think about. So.
Yeah, it's just so interesting, and I'm just looking at the watch, so at some point of time I need to get some interventions from the audience, but I think one of the issues as we are discussing, as we are looking at facing our time, is as we look at social media, or we look at the switch, or we look at managing hopelessness. I think one of the things that would also emerge as we were discussing yesterday was that this whole thing about inequality. I think that was something that, some of you are just looking at my notes, and I said, if, before we move out, if anybody would like to have a few minutes of intervention on the issue, their thoughts around the managing inequality, because as we've seen, every country that becomes economically successful, inequality also emerges. That's one of the challenges we have, and that could be because of digital divide, that could be because of inequality in terms of access to opportunities, inequality in terms of gender. There are multiple facets to this inequality, but since I thought this, when we are looking at facing our time, because that's also related to the impact of climate change, the impact of how we would do business and how we choose our careers. So anybody would want to take up? Yeah, Shrinkhala, you want to start off? Yeah.
While we are talking about opportunities, I believe that as a country we are moving very fast ahead in terms of educating girls and bringing them into the same level. We do have the remnants of the history of hundreds of years of patriarchy, but we are getting there. But when we talk about opportunities, there are these tiny societal constraints that's been hindering the growth of the women in our country. In the same household, if a lady stays out past 8 at night, then she's questioned. And if her job requires her to stay till late night, then it's a complete no-no because she's a woman. And just smaller things like taboo related to menstruation and taboos related to women talking to guys, or just being outgoing or partying or socializing even. These kinds of things are hindering a lot of growth of educated women who wants to go ahead in life and who wants to be career oriented. Our society is still not accepting of a woman who says that I don't want to marry, I want to continue with my career. If a woman says that I don't want to have kids, then she's looked upon as someone who's trying to destroy the society. If a woman says that I like partying or drinking, then she's looked upon as someone who is inviting men to hit on her. So these kinds of, general understanding has been creating the divide that we are trying so hard to erase, and it's been happening through the younger generation as well, through the educated generation as well. And it's very sad to say that, I feel like there's a lot of opportunity of being an ideal nation in our country because everything is so new. Like if we are starting agriculture, then we can start up with all new technologies. If we are starting up a good business school, then we can bring in the best technologies because nothing has been done yet. So nothing is damaged yet, if that makes any sense. But we are losing out on these kinds of opportunities. I'm sure Shiwani can put on her insights because she is one of the leading examples of successful women in the country, so yeah.
Thank you, Shrinkhala, so sweet of you.
Yeah, you want to add anything on this whole discourse around inequality? Because I think this also leads to what I would come back to Arnico a bit, is that when people are leaving Nepal, one is that there's a sense of hopelessness, but also one is that people do not want to, cannot manage to stay in the social structure despite, you get into liberal education, you get into international schools and colleges, and you come back and you have to go back to the old order. And the best way is to leave the country. So that's one, and that's also forcing this migration. And that's a big challenge also we see. So, yeah, anything you want to add as we move on to?
Well, I will say I've been very tempted to leave the country over and over again the last 4 years I've been here, but I haven't left. But in terms of dealing with issues of inequality, I think, I want to go back to the idea, the conversation about fake news, because that's really important. So who is consuming fake news? Who is believing in fake news? I think it is usually a mass that does not have critical thinking abilities. And that critical thinking ability comes out of education. So I think to beat the issue of inequality, foremost we have to think about how are we going to educate Nepali people around the country. And the second thing is access to finance. So it is, you know, just to say that just because someone is uneducated, they don't have critical thinking abilities, that's just very, very wrong. You know, there are very, very smart people who have very, very good ideas, but they lack access to finance, and that is I think the greatest problem to get out of this situation of inequality. And Bangladesh is a good example of this again.
Okay. Yeah. Arnico, you want to intervene? Anything you would like to say? Or you want to leave your comments for later? You're thinking, Camille, okay, as I want to put you in a spot. You know, for somebody who is looking at Nepal as an outsider who's come in and, you know, trying to get into Nepal, how do you look at this whole issue around inequality and the issues that have been just being discussed in terms of how we, and as a society, we function? Or how do you see this? You know, I mean, it's not about a critical comment we are looking at, but, you know, as an observer, what are some of the thoughts you see?
For me, I won't criticize anything. For me, it's still very much fascinating. Even after, you know, 8 years, I'm still amazed by the richness of the culture in terms of, you know, all the norms and all what is created within a family itself, even just through that. So, yeah, as an outsider, for me, there is many things that I wouldn't say do not make sense, but for sure, I mean, when I see the people evaluating around me, the men do get the most credit for everything, and the women, if they are around me, that at least they are allowed to work and they are doing something, but still they are not doing it the full span. I mean, they are not doing it the way they could be doing it. So for sure there is a way of improvement on that.
Arnico?
Okay, sorry, it took a moment to think. Well, in terms of inequality, I guess we've been talking about two different kinds of inequality. One is culturally imposed inequalities between men and women, and I think it's the young generation, the majority of the country that's in the young generation that most can change things, working together, using social media, maybe with Shrinkhala taking the leadership on some of these issues. In terms of inequality, in terms of opportunity to access education, to access finance, I see some really prominent bankers, some really prominent education people in the audience, and I hope to have a lively discussion on how to broaden access to education and to finance in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been a good, you know, sort of a lot of issues have come out. I don't want to get into summarizing it, but I think there must be a lot of questions the people in the audience would have. I think we just have a couple of rounds of, so we'll take a few questions from the floor. So the basic rule is, I can see hands going up. So the basic rule is, please do introduce yourself, and you know, and just please, you know, no long speeches. And at times in Nepal, what happens is that the people who ask questions speak longer than the panelists. So I'm not going to allow that to happen. So just try to be brief, 60 seconds maybe, and we will take a bunch of 5-6 questions. And if the questions is directed to a particular panelist, please do let us know who do you want your question to be answered. I'll be taking down notes, and we will take the sort of question. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 hands, and 5 hands. So we begin at the back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the first 5. You can down there. Yeah, yeah. At the back, at the back. That's the gentleman. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that's number 1. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Neeraj Bag, and I represent Association of Youth Organization Nepal, and one of the leading youth organizations in Nepal. So I particularly talk about some issues in the sector of youths, because we have lots of opportunity nowadays, and we are in the process of making laws in all the levels, local, provincial, and federal levels. So let us talk about, you know, we used to talk about those and how we contribute them, and to support for achieving SDGs. And we must talk about some issues unemployment and foreign employment, and we should also talk about issues like budgets in the sector of science and technology. So that's all. Thank you so much.
You have any specific panelists who you want this to be answered?
Not
Okay,
particular,
okay.
but let us discuss about these issues.
Okay,
and
thank you.
things.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the gentleman out there. No, out there. Next. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. My name is Kripendra Amatya. I would like to ask the question to our gentleman, our sir, Mr. Panday, about he brought the issue of global warming, and I remember the word of Donald Trump. He said that we need global warming because in snow, like I studied in Jilin University in China, minus 30 degree, very cold, and people have very bad concept about the snow. But then when I go to Harbin, they have snow and ice festival. So they try to change the paradigm of ice. So can we have something like snow festivals or something like that in Nepal, encouraging such sports which will make snow look good? Because in wintertime, nobody wants to travel to the Himalayan region. So can we change the paradigm by inventing games and other things in this country? Thank you.
Thank you. There's another hand out there. Yeah, one in the... That's right in front, yeah. No, yeah, that's... Yeah.
Can I intervene, sir?
Lateral. And then I'm coming there, please.
All right, I have one question for Shiwani. I'm Anup Shrestha. I work as research officer in ICIMOD Nepal. You mentioned that education will help a person to think analytically. So how do you define an educated person? Like, I have lots of friends who have high level of education, but still they post lots of fake news. So while thinking, so education is only the factor that will help you to think critically, or there are other factors as well? Yeah, thank you.
I'll pass it on.
Okay, please. Sorry, I'm just looking at your turns here, please.
Thank you. I'm Lisa Chogil. I'm a tourism specialist, but actually my question's addressed to all the panels, all the members of the panel. In Nepal today, I'm a long-term resident. I'm really interested that nobody has brought up the issue of population and population pressure and population control. Which seems to me it's the elephant in the room underlying so many of the other issues that have been discussed today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at the back, please. Sorry. And then next one is coming to you.
Finally, thank you, sir. Hi everyone, I'm Prajwal Bikram, a high school graduate. So I have this very simple question. Last time we two friends were talking, right? So then we had this group conversation. So like, if a person, he has follower of like 2,000, 3,000 in Facebook, then he is credible, else he is not. I mean, like that is the trend now. Someone is going to tie a bale in cat's neck, and then he is going to publish in Facebook as if that he really tied a bale in a tiger's neck. What I mean to say is that people are doing little events, little stuffs, right? Someone wants to be famous today, they can go to an orphanage, they can just give them some gifts and then post on Facebook. They are going to get some followers. So how are we going to stop this trend? I mean, we are living in the world of social media. We need to get out to develop this country, right? So I just want to ask this question to the all panels. What would they say on this? Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah. The last one before it comes. So I'll come to you in the next one.
My name is Sagun. I'm a lawyer by education and profession. I was earlier associated with Deutsche Bank. I was working as a lawyer there. I'm now back in Nepal, trying to give back to the country. My question is directed to Mr. Arnico Panday. Firstly, sir, thank you for your insights. Very informative. My particular question is that as someone who represents an intergovernmental research center, and a learning and education center, how receptive is the government and different government agencies to your findings and to findings of similar organization like yours? And is the government taking encouraging steps towards implementing that, especially on the front of climate change, not just in terms of complying with international accords, but also creating a culture of consciousness creating a clean environment. So do we really have much to be hopeful about?
Thank you. So maybe I'll come back to the other hands. I'm just being mindful. 1, 2, I know, 3, 4. So I'll come back, but then maybe we'll start with, before we forget the questions. Maybe Shiwani, you want to start off with from the other side? There was a particular question directed to you.
Question on inequality.
Inequality, and then also there's, I think Lisa had population pressure around. Yeah. We had, issue around social media. So yeah.
Whoever asked me that question, thank you so much. And I think you answered the question while you asked me by asking me if it was multidimensional. The answer is, of course, inequality is multidimensional. Plus, I am not an expert in inequality, so that was just something, one of the things that I see lacking in Nepal, lack of access to education. Inequality itself is multidimensional, and I think the solutions to it are also multidimensional.
Arnico?
Thanks. I'll address 3 of the questions. The first one by Mr. Amatya. Trump's tweet about where is global warming when the US is having a few cold days. Climate change is sort of the decade scale average. It's not what's the small up and downs going on, and Trump's an idiot. He doesn't get it. But in terms of your question about how do we promote appreciation of snow and ice and get more tourism into the high mountain areas in the winter, I think it's starting to happen. If you look at the traffic jams in Fulchoki every time there was snowstorms, there was a little bit of snowfall there. Of course, going trekking at high altitudes is not easy in January. We're also facing a time of decreasing amounts of snowfall, decreasing access to snowy places at lower altitudes as the country and the world warms up. But it's actually a good idea to promote some winter festivals to bring in more people. Lisa, your question about is population the big elephant in the room? I'm not sure, because if you look at the trends taking place in a lot of countries and also starting to happen in Nepal with decreasing number of kids per family, decreasing number of children born to women, which tends to happen with both women's education and increasing healthcare and lifespan. It will probably be a couple of decades and we'll face a situation of an age in how they live. I'm not convinced that it's the biggest elephant in the room. It might be one of them. And Shagunji, your question about, as an intergovernmental organization working on climate change and other knowledge and how receptive are governments to it. Well, we work with 8 countries, and the level of responsiveness from the governments to us and the level of engagement varies quite a bit. And being headquartered in Kathmandu, we do have quite a little bit of cooperation with the government of Nepal. Prior to this December's climate summit in Poland, we had quite a bit of interaction. I was actually invited to contribute to the Right Honorable President's speech in Poland. I was in Poland for a week interacting a lot with the Nepali delegation. I was in a kind of post-meeting wrap-up, okay, what can we learn, how do we move forward type of things. There is a bit of a challenge with people moving around relatively rapidly among the bureaucrats in Nepal, but I don't think there's any lack of motivation to do the best we can about addressing climate change. Interestingly, on air pollution, even the government of India has started approaching us for help, and how can we create, for a problem that crosses borders, how can we help create cross-border knowledge platforms and things. So within the limitations of how governments function, I'm actually pretty pleased with our interaction with the governments. Thank you.
Thanks, Arnico. Shrinkhala, you want to answer some of those questions?
Yes, though the question wasn't aimed at me, I think the question about snow and creating adventure tourism out of it, something like that, yeah. I think the biggest challenge is access to these areas. Like Arnico said, Fulchoki barely got any snow, and then we had traffic jam because it's accessible, and Karinchok is getting all the tourists because of easy access to the place. So it's all about access, and if we can just provide access, accommodation, and activity to the place, then the tourism will surely be booming. And I would like to address to one question about social media, credibility, and people just posting pictures about helping an orphanage for a day and then gaining likes. And I honestly see nothing wrong with that. At least something good came out of it. At least someone fed an orphanage of 100 for their birthday, though it was just for the sake of a picture. The people got food. So it's all right. It's nothing. Nothing is so bad. I do believe that social media is portraying the best version of yourself, the best clothes that you wear, the best food that you eat. So that can be seen as a certain set of standard to someone else who views their profile, and it can cause a lot of undervaluing themselves or inferiority complex. And you know, this has been affecting a lot of youth, and we do have the highest rate of mental illness right now. It's growing exponentially, and social media and these kinds of things, like the way we post just to gain followers, and how we try to idolize our lives, which in fact we all have our ups and downs. This has been affecting a lot of people. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to not be the ideal person. I try to portray what's real in my social media account so that people can view like, oh, okay, Miss Nepal is as normal as we are, so it's all right. So that's the least that I can do, and I think we all should be doing that as well.
Thank you. Camille, any of the... Yeah, I know, you're running out of mics.
The closer. So I just go back to Lisa, I think about population control, which is a very politically incorrect thing to talk about, right? But still, as far as Kathmandu is concerned, I think the matter is not so much, I mean, as far as Nepal is concerned, it's not so much the number of people, because, I mean, it's a country of, what, 28 million. So a lot of it is concentrated in Kathmandu, right? We are, what, 6 million within the valley, something like that. And I think that is the problem. Why not to, develop better infrastructure in rural places? Why not we go back to quality? Why not to implement better quality, accommodation? So if we go back to tourism, so it's why not to spread out a little bit more? Of course, people are coming here. That's the only place where they can get education, decent education. So we have to, I mean, not we, but like maybe good education infrastructure has to emerge in other places than Kathmandu, probably, and spread out the flow.
No. Thanks. I think I'm very tempted to also intervene, because I think, Lisa, you asked the thing on population pressure, and I think I also don't think, like Arnico, there's an issue around population pressure, but if we look at 2050, when Nepal's population is going to sort of stabilize, at that point of time, we are going to have a large population that is going to be above 60, and we actually, Nepal has, if you are facing our times, Nepal literally has less than 30 years to reap its demographic dividends. From there, we are going to have more people to take care of than people that are going to work. So that is a bigger, I think, rather than the population pressure, is the other way around. But definitely, as Camille was talking about, I think we are looking at the displacement, sort of the 10 years, we should not forget that the 10 years of insurgency displaced people from rural areas to urban areas, and that has created unprecedented pressure in urban centers. And perhaps with this new federal structure, with opportunities within your walking distances, would then not let people to leave their villages or leave their towns to come to larger urban centers or come to Kathmandu. And hopefully we would have about, I don't know, we keep discussing that if this whole federal Nepal structure works well, we can actually see about 1.5 million people moving back out of Kathmandu. And so that would, so it's again looking at managing internal displacement, managing how people move internally. So I was very tempted, but I think one of the first questions that came in, I think there were a lot of comments that was made, but also when we are facing our times in Nepal, I keep thinking as to who decides who is the leading organization. Well, that was something I think we can talk about at the next point. So yeah, there's a gentleman out there. Yeah, you can out there in the front here. That hand is up, and then I.
Hi, my name is BJ. I'm one of those people who has one foot in the door. I live in San Francisco, Silicon Valley. And you know, you talked, especially Shiwani, about the idea of hopelessness. But hopefully, you know, people like us trying to come back, we provide an environment of hopefulness. And one thing that we're here for is what we call transformative technology. It's the intersection of technology and mindfulness and well-being of the mind, tending towards consciousness. So what we're trying to say is Nepal has this immense backdrop of spirituality, and the West needs it, especially the Silicon Valley. So if we can combine the two, we'll have an incredible opportunity. So we do have an event coming up on Saturday. I'd be happy to share that later. But I do have, you know, I come from digital marketing background. So Shrinkhala, if you want to divert your traffic to good causes, I'd be happy to help. And Shiwani, I had one question for you regarding, you know, your businesses. Have you ever thought about the intersection of technology and spirituality?
Thank you. There's a hand at the back. Yeah, the gentleman with the hat there. They can, yeah, straight. Yeah, yeah, there.
Yeah, thank you. Namaskar and bonjour to our French friends. My name is Ram Babu Dhakal. I was associated with the Foreign Service of the Government of Nepal. Now I am a lawyer. I have one because I attempted to make this comment and question is rather because I listen to all of you very attentively with his attention. Then I felt, because I come from a village where 90% of our youth have already gone outside. And then a lot of parents and families, they consult with me because I also happen to be outside in the abroad, United States, Switzerland, Paris, here and there. Because they know that because why I was outside and what is my experience, how these people in these countries, those are advanced countries, how they have been living, what is their society. And I hear the discussion here, the views expressed by all panelists, and the questions represent here some kind of metropolitan elite class issues. But if you go to the village, I think our Ms. Nepal, who all talked about that in the house, she gave this Mexican one tribe people, Chipas you said, and then if you go to the Thari, if you go to the Tarai plain areas, you'll see how many people understand the issues you have just talked. Are they connected to the problems we have discussed? They do understand? Yes, Shiwani said yes. She was educated in London. She's talking about the fake news, disinformation, misinformation in social media. How many youths of the people who come from village to Kathmandu and consult with me, like people like us, saying that how we can do, how we can be empowered. They have already graduated. They are graduate. They have done A-level school, high school, 12th grade, but they do not have power to run their life, to understand their life, to use their knowledge and education what they have gained, why they are behind. So I think all of you could just think of it, that how these youth people who have been gone outside to find a job, and then see, we are agriculture, economy country. We have a lot of lands in the Tarai plain area and area. So can you address the empowering? My question is how you can empower the youth people, they can be productively engaged in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll just come to the question. I think it's a very interesting question the gentleman raised. And I think I keep wondering, why do Nepalis who come from village, they think they're inferior? Well, you know, this is a big question. I think, you know, this is also the issue of hopelessness, to say that if you come from a village, if you come from a small town, you are hopeless than an urban elite. Because if you look at one of the biggest challenges we have is urban centers have more poverty than in rural areas. That's the new dimensions that is coming in. So I would come back, that would be something very interesting to talk about. I think I'll take 2 more interventions before we close. Yeah, at the back. Yeah, Samita, yeah. The lady out there and 2 more. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Shristi Goring. So my question is about switches. So we've been talking about the switch from fossil fuel to clean energy and external migration to internal employment. It seems evident that we know where we are and where we want to be, but my question is, as a nation, why haven't we been able to make the switches? Secondly, how can we make sure that the switches are made? Thirdly, what is the role of the government in ensuring the switches happen? And finally, I do agree with the previous point that this is quite a privileged conversation. And how do we make sure that people beyond this room are involved in those switches? Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman at the back, yeah.
Hi, my name is Samir. I work at the Nepal Leadership Academy. My question is for Shiwani. So you talked a little bit about the culture of hopelessness and kind of linked it to, you know, the political system and the wider context that we find ourselves in right now. But on an individual level, especially for young people, how do you think one can maintain hope in the face of adversity and uncertainty? And I know that question is pretty broad, so maybe you can give an example of how you've maintained hope over the past few years.
Thank you. There was one more hand out there. I think we'll just finish at the back. I'm giving preference to all the backbenchers. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Aman. My question is about the discourse between inequality and economic growth. I think you mentioned it a few minutes ago. So how do we change that mindset that with economic growth, inequality comes through? Because we look at the major discourses around countries like the United States and those big economies which have huge disparity within them. Why not look at examples of economies which might not be as big in terms of GDP as those Western countries, but are doing well in equality and still prosperous? So how do we change that discourse and the model that we're looking at?
Okay, thank you. There was one more hand out there. Yeah, I think the lady out there, and yeah, I know. Then I'll move on to this side.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sneh. So ever since I can remember, Nepal has always been known as a country in transition. I feel like politically, socially, economic, we've always been in transition. And this question kind of relates to this, to the theme and the culture of hopelessness that we've been talking about. There are people on the panel, maybe particularly Shrinkhala and Shiwani, who could address this. I think he asked this question more from an individual perspective, but what can we do really to change the narrative of our country so that there's a culture of hope that we can spread within our country that then becomes the way the world perceives us as well? Thank you.
Should we take a round of questions from there? Shiwani, lots of questions to you guys. Come on.
Okay, I'm going to try my best to address all of them. So if I miss some, I apologize. Thank you, everyone, for the great questions. So in terms of the question about how do you give youth agency and how do you make them feel power. I think this was the question on inequality. We are all very privileged here, but how do we change this conversation on hope? I cannot speak for everybody, but for me, the reason, this goes to the second question, how do I maintain hope? The reason I am able to maintain hope is because I have built a community of great role models around me. So while I do business, I work with people like my father, who's an incredible role model to me in terms of what is possible, and my friends who are also who are always constantly pushing me to see beyond the politics of, beyond everyday politics that we have in Nepal. So I think that's my personal story. And going with that, I think addressing this question of how do we, people outside Kathmandu, find agency, find hope. We have a really great role model amongst us, Shrinkhala, who is from Hetauda and not from Kathmandu. So if we were, for example, if we were able to build more role models and have examples of more people like Shrinkhala who are not from Kathmandu, I think that would definitely change the conversation for a lot of people outside this city.
Thanks. Arnico, you do. Yeah, you need to share the mic. Yeah.
I will just add on to two of the questions. One is by Rambabu Dhakalde, talking about us being metropolitan elites. I cannot change who I am. I did spend 3 years as a child, 3 formative years in rural Sindhu Palchuk district, and have some understanding of rural issues. I can keep learning more. I cannot change who I am. And I think the issue is to focus on those things I'm good at, and getting into having enough supply of clean energy to be able to imagine it, as well as technologies available. For example, with electric mobility, electric vehicles, buses are only just starting to come onto the market in the last couple of years in ways that are feasible and economically viable to operate. The role of the government there is very important in creating the incentives, the tax environments, the infrastructure to make it happen. And I think Nepal's government is actually quite at the forefront with certain things. In fact, our president was the only head of state in Poland. In her speech, she talked about being the only head of state to drive an electric vehicle. She sets an example, and I think we are moving towards having enough domestic clean energy to charge batteries at night, batteries of electric vehicles at night. But it's also only been very recent that electric vehicles have been available in ways that are feasible for the president and anyone else to be driving around. I think taking the message beyond this room, it's to a large extent it's the role of the government to create the environment for it to happen. But there's also a role for us on stage, for example. I switched to an electric car 2 years ago, and I think there's an opportunity for setting examples as well. Thank you.
Shrinkhala, lots of questions for you, I know.
I'd like to address to the question about this being a privileged conversation and an elitist debate. Shiwani said that I am out of Kathmandu, but I'm sure you meant someone not from cities or towns. You meant someone who is out of it and areas beyond even reach of modernization. So what I believe is the education system is flawed. In what sense is that we believe that we are an agriculture-oriented country and our economy is there. But when we talk about education, we teach them B.Ed, ISC, these subjects that thousands others are studying as well. And it's difficult for them to come from a school with limited resources and limited teaching staff to compete with people who are studying in the city center, even out of the country, with all the good resources. And it's a competition that they can never lead. They can never take a lead in. So the difference that we need to make is teach them something that they are good at. Teach them agriculture, teach them fishing, teach them farming, teach them something that's been handed down to them through generations and generations, and that's what they can take a lead on, and that's how they can grow. And I think that's the solution that we need. And the other question was about, sorry.
The technology part of it had come out also.
Technology, hope, the question. This was the most difficult question, I think. The culture of hope, how do we develop it? So I think we need a lot of examples in our country who need to come out and say that I went abroad, but I came back and I was able to do this. I did it and it is possible. And the most important thing is we need to have policies that make youth believe that if they are staying back and if they are investing, we are there as a security. You can invest and our policies and our laws are going to help you in any possible way. Like if I'm starting up something like Tootle, instead of cutting everything and stopping it, I would be more happy if government would bring in more startup culture. And like she said, like Shiwani said, like in Colombo, they are setting up these, where they are actually trying to scout for ideas that can help us grow. So that should be the way to go about it and be proactive about our policies, because where Singapore is 50 years ahead of time, we are 50 years behind, and we need a major intervention in policy level. And I think that would bring in a lot of hope, and media would also come in handy, instead of sharing news about our government approaching other countries for opening up labor employments, or migration, or making things easier for us to go to Malaysia, Japan. Instead of that, why not media promote more ideas about startup cultures, about subsidies in agriculture or fishing or education loans, or whatever like that. So everything has to come into play, and we ourselves need to believe as well that staying back, we are contributing to our country, and our personal growth is also taking our country forward. So just staying back and doing the same amount of hard work that we would have done abroad would take our country forward, and we would be creating opportunities in our country as well. So that should be the mindset that we need to have. We all need to have that positive sort of outlook to create the hope that we are looking for.
Thanks.
I just want to add one line.
Yeah.
I think we've already started the conversation here in this room, just even talking about the politics of hope, and this idea that's in all of our heads now. We can start talking to other people about it and discussing these ideas elsewhere.
Camille.
I just conclude also on the culture of hope. I find, Nepal to be, if from an outside perspective, full of potential, and especially if you tackle grassroots, if you tackle citizen itself, like individuals. If you look at individuals, there is so many things that is possible to be done, and so many things that is happening. So I think we should just rely on us and do the thing. I mean,
So last two questions. I think three hands I can see. At a cluster of hands
Hi everyone, my name is Alpa Shakya, and I run a company called Go Nepal. And my question, I'm really glad that towards the end we started talking about education. And I'm really wondering why we didn't talk more about education facing our time. Because everything underlying is education. When we're talking about youth, hopelessness, when you're talking about culture, when you're talking about climate change, it's all about education, isn't it? Because we didn't teach our youth, or we didn't learn ourselves about what they should be not liking in the social media, and what they should be liking in social media, what they should be promoting in social media, and what they shouldn't be promoting in social media, what they should be learning at school and what they shouldn't be learning in college. So, we need to basically facing our time. How much do you think, education, and another topic that we didn't discuss here, facing our time of consumerism. What is it doing to social media? What is it doing to climate? What is it doing to our culture and society? Don't you think that's important?
Okay. Two issues, education, consumerism. Okay.
Hello everyone, I am Pukar Bandari and I am a tourism student. My question is, what should be done to attract particularly French tourists to Nepal? Thank you.
French tourists in Nepal, great. The gentleman up in the front,
Hi everyone, my name is Kanchan Adhikari, and looking at the headline there, facing our time, I've been tempted to just take out the hour and want to ask the business leaders, data scientists, youth leaders, and I would say maybe lifestyle and tradition promoters, how much do y'all consider time and psychology in your decisions and in the opinions that you share? And that's a question for us all. I'm very ignorant of Nepali history and most world history in general, but it seems like there's been a radical shift as a culture from a kingdom to a non-kingdom, and in the amount of data that we have available and the amount of generational information loss. I've watched my bhaujus and dais be able to identify every single herb and plant and medicinal flora in the garden to their children, not to be able to recognize a single one because they moved to a cement block. So are any of us actually considering time as a force in the same way that an engineer would consider gravity in construction? The awareness and discrimination was mentioned once. Education is just an aspect of that. So yes, and the one comment about the village, we're talking about psychology fundamentally. We had a comment from a panelist saying, look, I'm not guilty for what I do. I'm just going to focus on what I'm good at. What is Nepal good at? Why are we not focusing on what people come here in millions to see, and rather it seems like we're constantly trying to innovate and reinvent and rebrand ourselves to provide what the world wants. Why would we do that? Thanks.
Okay, I'm just being mindful of the time, so I'm not going to look at any more hands. So answering these very critical questions that have come up, and also your own closing remarks of facing our times. So, which I think maybe I'll start from this side now. Camille.
Yeah, I'll just answer the question about French tourists. I would say is that just send more Nepali people to Alliance, so like they learn French, because we are very bad in English, and I think it would make people more secure to know that they have a large French-speaking auditorium. So yeah, that's all. Thank you very much for inviting me today, and it was a pleasure to share that time together.
Thanks. Shrinkhala?
I'd like to answer the question about what Nepal is good at and why are we not focusing on it. I believe that the fact that we are so diverse has caused our government to be confused about what line we should be focusing on. We say that we should be leading at tourism, and then we are destroying all our tourism heritages and building highways that are in no way competent to bring in tourists in any ways. We talk about having great landscapes, but then we build these ugly road networks into the conservation areas, and it's difficult to walk there in peace because it's dusty. You don't want dusty roads when you want calm and serenity and the views of the mountains. So we need to catch this one concrete idea. So what is Nepal as a country? Are we agriculture-based country? Are we good at hydropower? Are we good at tourism? Or are we trying to build industries? We need to have a proper and clear one set of mindset. Okay, Nepal is a country of tourism, and for that maybe we need more hydroelectric energy. We need sustainable energy that will back us up. And we also have potential for agriculture, but we are only going to invest on good scientific research-based agriculture techniques. So I think we need to really focus on tourism, and that I really believe is what our country needs right now, and we need to catch that one track. About French tourists, I think I am going to France on March, so I will do more research about what we can do to bring in more French tourists into Nepal. But I believe that French are still unaware that Nepal has such diverse culture, tradition, and history of art and architecture. Nepal is mostly known in the European world as a country of mountaineering or trekking, but a very few would know that we have an even richer culture. Our roots have such great values, and we are such diverse country, and that needs to be promoted all around the world. On my closing remarks, do you want me to give my closing remarks right now? Yeah. Yeah, I'm very privileged to be sitting alongside such influential people on the stage, and thank you so much for all the amazing questions and for listening to us. And this was definitely an eye-opener for me as well. I learned a lot, and I hope these kinds of events get a lot of space in the future. Thank you so much.
I'd like to start by slightly disagreeing about Nepal's main focus being just being good for tourism. I think Nepal is and should be good at many things, but more so. We have such a diverse landscape, such a diverse country, as you just mentioned. I think different places should be good at different things, and when we need clarity about it. Not the same kind of urbanization throughout the country, not damming up every river for hydropower, but we should have our rivers for hydropower and the rivers where dolphins and fish run free and where rafting can continue to happen. We need industries, but not throughout the country, in certain areas. We need places that are protected for specific tasks, specific incomes. Even take, for example, the current ban on operating drones without permission from the police or the military. Why not set aside certain parts of the country for using and promoting and researching with using drones for deliveries and all kinds of things? Just pick an area that's away from airports. We have a country that, because of all the folds of the landscape, is so different even when you go short distances. Almost none of us have visited all parts of the country. Almost none of us know the full extent of it. And that's one of its strengths and richnesses as well. But also, it's what makes us vulnerable to climate change and to other challenges as well, because we're not fully aware of all the impacts that are happening beyond what we can see from here. Thank you.
Those are your closing remarks as well? Okay.
Okay, Shiwani.
So very, very interesting questions. You could write essays and books on a lot of those questions. So even attempting to answer some of them in detail would be a waste of my time and everybody's time here, I'd say. But I agree with Shrinkhala and Arnico on their points, and I think what we're lacking is clarity. Clarity on what Nepal is and what we have to offer, and going back to my previous point on having role models, I think even in Nepal, if we start building companies and start building like a new startup, like Camille's startup, Cosy Homes, is a great example of preserving Nepali ethnicity and Nepali identity, Newari architecture. As a result, I'm sure, Camille, there have been many other people who are attempting similar boutique hotel-style homes and apartments and so on and so forth. So I think just having an example is sometimes really crucial and important, whether it is an idea or whether it's a person. And for my closing remarks, thank you all very, very much for being here. It's really amazing to see a houseful audience who's really engaged with the conversation. And I'm also really thankful to all the incredible panelists here. I've learned so much from just being a part of this conversation today.
Thank you, Shiwani. I think I am not here to summarize, but first of all, my apologies to those who raised their hands and couldn't ask questions. But I think conversations like this has to also be time-bound, and that's what I enjoy moderating. I think on the French tourists, definitely we need more books in French, and some of them are coming out this year. So please be mindful of that. As I was listening to a lot of questions, I think a couple of things that definitely from the Nepal Economic Forum perspective, and as we'll discuss with Embassy of France and the AFK, we would start looking at, there is an initiative we are already starting off with Synergics on fake news. That's something that we are going deeper into. Definitely, if we are going to make the issues around climate change integrate into our lives through either be it consumption, production in each part of aspects of our life, then we have to look at the larger issue of circular economy, and that's one big thing that you're looking at. But definitely, I think, Shrinkhala, you may want to write what is it to be an icon, sort of some of these things that you are believing in, and perhaps that could be the bridge from where we think of hopelessness and where we think of inequity to really looking at facing our times with a lot of hope, with a lot of positivity, and a lot of energy to see that here is Nepal to move and transform into a completely different level. Thank you all to panelists, and a big round of applause to the panelists. And I think Pauline would come and make the closing remarks.
Many thanks, Sujeev, for smartly moderating our debate about the topic facing our time. We would like to thank all the panelists for sharing their inspiring thoughts, Shiwani Neupane, Arnico Panday, Shrinkhala Khatiwada, and Camille Hanesse. Quality as a solution to face our time could be a quote to remember from today's discussion, among many others. Many thanks to the Nepal Economic Forum for your ideas and great cooperation in preparing this event with the French Embassy to Nepal. I would also like to thank Hotel Himalaya and my precious team of Alliance Francaise Kathmandu for the organization. Thank you all for attending today's discussion. You can keep an eye on Alliance Francaise Facebook page. We don't share fake news, but we will inform you about the next event we will organize for the 7th anniversary of friendship between France and Nepal. Merci, Danyabat.
The conversations will continue over tea. I think the tea is being served at the Sunken Gardens.